Sheldon Whitehouse is the junior senator from Rhode Island, where he has served since 2007. He was Rhode Island's U.S. Attorney and State Attorney General before being elected to the Senate, and he currently serves on the Finance Committee, Judiciary Committee, Environmental and Public Works Committee, the Budget Committee, the big ones. Senator Whitehouse has championed efforts to shine a light on the dark money from our elections and make Congress and the courts accountable to the American people. Senator Whitehouse, it's a privilege to talk to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Mariah, thanks for having me on. It's great.
There's obviously so much to talk about today, but before we jump in, the University of Rhode Island just revoked Rudy Giuliani and Michael Flynn's honorary degrees. Did you have something to do with that?
No, that was entirely their own decision, and I think, unfortunately, abundantly well justified.
Yeah. Did you think, just a few years ago that Giuliani would be in this position?
I didn't think either of them would be. I met Michael Flynn in Afghanistan when he and his brother were on the command team. And I was really proud that these two Rhode Island brothers from Middletown, Rhode Island, who had joined the military and risen so high in it, were there in these positions of real responsibility. And I thought when he went over to the Defense Intelligence Agency, that was a good thing. And from that moment on, he just seems to have spiraled right off the stage. When I saw him as a retired military officer chanting "lock her up,"
right,
I really had to wonder, because one thing that the military is taught about, it's what democracy means. And the idea that you're chanting "lock her up" about a Democratic candidate is,
yeah,
how the mighty have fallen.
It's pretty unbelievable that the mass delusion that some people seem to have been caught up in from very early on. It's been a tough few years, but last week in particular was a tough one in the Senate. And you gave a fantastic speech on the floor, but ultimately it was not enough to persuade a single Republican and two Democrats to pass even a small change to the filibuster for voting rights. How are you feeling about that? And where do we go from here on voting rights?
Not feeling great about it. It's, I think, a really unfortunate turn of events. And I think that probably the next step on voting rights will be to pick some of the elements of the bill and make sure that the Republicans have to vote on them as well. Start, building the record. Because at the moment, they can say, well, there's this one thing in that bill that I didn't like.
Right.
That was the Democrat poison pill that drove all of us Republicans off of it. So you kind of, to make them honest about this, you got to break it out and make them vote on some of the subparts. In fact, all of them, if we can find the time. But the key ones to me are this whole bulk gerrymandering scam that they've run, which the public really does not like. And then the thermonuclear one, the kryptonite that the public completely detests, is dark money corruption. They completely got away with voting against transparency in political spending. They never brought it up. I think I was one of the few speeches that focused on it. So we've got to really drive that point home, because that's a point that resonates with voters across the spectrum. And if we're going to hold off the battering that it looks like we're going to take in 2022 in Congress, we got to have a better story than we have right now. And I think casting the Republicans as the dark money party wreathed in special interest corruption is as good a storyline as we're going to get.
Yeah, and it's accurate too. So
and it enjoys the added benefit of being true.
Yeah. Well, to your point, last week also marked the 12-year anniversary of the Citizens United decision. As a result of that decision, since 2010, there's been $7.4 billion of outside spending in federal elections, and over $1 billion in untraceable dark money was spent in 2020 alone. So if we're taking the voting rights bill piecemeal, where does your Disclose Act fall in that? Does it have a new life? And for listeners who might not be familiar with the Disclose Act, can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, it basically requires anybody who gives more than 10 grand in an election to identify themselves. And it's set up so that if you hide behind a front group or hide behind a front group that's hiding behind a front group, no matter how many Russian dolls you nest in, we will find you in that law. So it'll be effective at getting through to the over $10,000 donors. And I think that will make a very big difference. What we see now is, $10 million donors. And that goes back to Citizens United that let unlimited amounts of money flow. And then I'll just throw in one added point, which is that the worst thing about Citizens United was the Republican justices' failure to enforce it on its own terms. They said that the reason that they would let the unlimited money flow is because it would all be transparent. And so there's no danger of corruption and voters can see what's going on around them. And of course, instantly, particularly the fossil fuel industry, figured out how to hide its identity and go through front groups and super PACs and donors trust and everything else. And over again, we brought this up to the court. And in one case, we did it in bipartisan fashion. John McCain and I wrote a brief together to the court saying, you were had. This was back when I thought this was an innocent mistake. You were had, and you need to clean up this mess. You said it was going to be transparent. This case is your chance to clarify that it actually has to be transparent or else it doesn't qualify. And then I brought it up again in the case about super PACs. So they knew perfectly well that their transparency predicate was not true. And they had plenty of chances to fix it, and they conspicuously, deliberately refused to fix it. So they don't just own the unlimited nature of the money, they also own that it's unlimited dark money. They did that by omission, not commission.
I mean, you kind of answered my question, but I'm wondering if you have more specifics. Let's say the Disclose Act passes. What do you think this transparency will do for voters? What might they find out that might change, who or what they support?
Just for our listeners, the senator did a great eyebrow take.
He did. I feel like you have some good information.
I think they'd find out a lot. I think the two big things that would happen is that there'd be a huge education for voters. A citizen has a job in this country. You don't just sit there in front of your TV like a consumer and pick, right? You're supposed to be an active participant in your democracy. Being a citizen is a duty and a job, and you're disabled from doing that duty and doing that job properly if you don't know who out on the political field is doing what to whom. When the ad comes in that says Sheldon Whitehouse is a rat, this ad was brought to you by Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity, and there's no such thing in real life as Rhode Islanders for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity. It's weird, and you lose your grip on what's going on around you. If it said this ad was brought to you by ExxonMobil, then you go, I understand. I know what's going on here. I can do my job as a citizen. So that would be one really important thing. And the other thing is, I think a lot of the dark money would just disappear. It'd be like turning on the light in the kitchen and the cockroaches all scuttle for the dark.
Yeah, we have the same kind of, I'm here in California, we have a similar problem with ballot propositions. And I have people who reach out to me all the time wondering like which way they should vote on a ballot proposition. And it's almost just a general rule of thumb, like where are the most ads coming from? Who's spending the most money? Vote the other way on that. It's
pretty safe bet. But to your point, Steve, can you tell?
Right.
Yeah. No,
because if they're all these, what they do is they set up phony front groups and they launder their money through the phony front group, and the phony front group buys the ad. And then when you try to figure out who the phony front group is, it traces to a mail drop someplace and maybe a lawyer who says, I'm not telling you nothing about who funded this. And so you're stymied in trying to figure out whose voice it is you're being forced to listen to. And that's just not right. Not in a democracy.
I mean, the corrupting influence of dark money on our democracy is hard to ignore. It's fundamental. You're the most vocal.
Somebody called what we're in right now a tsunami of slime.
Yeah.
And that phrase has stuck with me, tsunami of slime. A newspaper writer came up with that, and I use it now quite a lot. And one of the reasons we're having a tsunami of slime is because of these phony front groups, right? If somebody had to put a really slimy smear ad on TV and it had to be in the real name of the real entity, if it was ExxonMobil or if it was, the candidate running against me, then they would have to hold back on the sliminess because they would be accountable for their voice. But when they can set up a phony front group, you can foul that group and then just throw it away like toilet paper and no one's accountable. And so the torrent of slime continues, again, because of the dark money, because of the Supreme Court, which not coincidentally is the court that dark money built right now.
Well, let's talk quickly about that too, because I heard you on a panel once talking about the dark money that also places justices and influences the courts, and that when companies are trying to get legislation pushed through and they're trying to court lawmakers and it doesn't happen on the Hill, they just go across the street to the Supreme Court and file over there. Can you explain how that works and how dark money has influenced the courts?
Yeah, first of all, it's not simple and it's not something you set up overnight. They've been building this over years. I think it probably really started in earnest after Bork blew up in bipartisan fashion and they had to figure out another way to try to radicalize the court. So a lot of money. First of all, the Republican Judicial Selection Turnstile was set up in the Federalist Society, which is a Republican organization. They say they're not, but they obviously are. And it's one that takes enormous, anonymous, unreported contributions. So it's a dark money group. And when you give a dark money group the right to pick Supreme Court justices, it's obvious that people are going to try to pay their way to that table to get a voice in making sure that they're a judge who will rule, let's say, for the fossil fuel industry. And then once they've got them picked, a whole new little apparatus pops up to pay for the political campaigns to push the selected justice. And that's another set of dark money groups led by something called the Judicial Crisis Network. But there's, 40 groups in that array. And then once you get that done and it's time for the vote, you'll find that there's enormous overlap between those dark money groups and the dark money groups that fund Mitch McConnell and his super PACs and his leadership PACs and his dark money so-called outside independent groups. So Republicans line up very quickly because they're the funding source for them. And then once they get them on the court, there are maybe, I think the biggest we've seen is 50 front groups that turn up, each pretending to be independent as amicus curiae and broadcast an orchestrated message to their appointees on the court. Okay, fellas, here's what we want. And then you go and look at the end result, and sure enough, they get it over and over and over and over again, well beyond what statistics would justify. Something's going on.
Yeah, and we're seeing some new cases in front of the court right now that are very worrisome as well.
Yeah, some really grim ones.
What has you most concerned right now?
I think the extent to which the court that dark money built is in turn building a constitutional right to dark money for their dark money benefactors. The scariest case for me was the Americans for Prosperity Foundation case that just came up. And if you're not keeping score, you wouldn't really know what Americans for Prosperity Foundation is. in the modern era, the dark money political state of the art is to set up a 501c3 corporation and a 501c4 corporation under the IRS code. And the 501c4 does the political stuff, and the 501c3 does everything you can get a tax deduction for, research and organizing and those sorts of things. So the Koch brothers' centerpiece of their dark money archipelago of operations is Americans for Prosperity. It's the 501c4. And the Americans for Prosperity Foundation is its adjunct, it's its twin, it's its alter ego. So it's the Koch brothers' political operations centerpiece that goes into the court and says, you know, California shouldn't be entitled to find out who gives us money, even if it helped them combat fraud and self-dealing and tax deductibility in wealthy families. And the Supreme Court agrees, never bothers to distinguish what they said in Citizens United, which is the only thing that defends us from corruption in this space is transparency. Mm-hmm. Now, when it's the Koch brothers operation and they're asking, now it's, oh, you have a constitutional right not to be transparent. Absolutely. This is part of your right of association. And they cooked that right up out of thin air. It does not exist.
The least surprising thing about that was that the Koch brothers were involved in that anecdote.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about President Biden's first year in office. Extraordinarily challenging, but also we've overcome a lot, adding 6.4 million jobs. 2021 saw the largest yearly increase in labor force participation since 1996. What has this first year, having the majority, meant to you?
Good news on jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Very good news on infrastructure.
Right.
Good news on economic equality to the extent that the rescue funds went out and helped with things like the child tax credit and earned income tax credit and all of that. Disappointment so far on Build Back Better and on climate, which is baked into Build Back Better to some degree anyway. And then I think at some point, this White House needs to pay attention to the fact that there is this enormous apparatus out there of dozens of front groups that have billions of dollars in dark money at their disposal, filtered through, you know, the Koch brothers and Donors Trust and the Bradley Foundation and the Scaife Foundation and the Mercers and the DeVosses and all of that. And that some attention needs to be paid to that apparatus, which is out to steal the court, suppress the vote, own the Republican Party. It's an ambitious scheme that they're operating. And so far, they've gotten away with exactly zero pushback from the Biden administration. In fact, the president has only used that two-word term that Jane Mayer made famous, dark money. He's only used that term once in his entire first year in office. So I'm hoping that there'll be a renewed focus on taking on this enterprise that is up to so much evil in our democracy.
You know, you, as we said in the beginning, you've been championing this issue, and it's so fundamental to our democracy. But we don't hear about it from a lot of other of your colleagues. And as you just said, we're doing.
I know, it's so frustrating.
Why aren't they shouting it from the rooftops?
Because I don't think we're very strategic.
Yeah.
You know, the Republicans are basically run like a corporate enterprise, and they have a lot of the benefits of corporate enterprise. They plan ahead, they send things out to subsidiaries, they know how to bring people together for board meetings and make decisions and then effectuate those decisions. They plot and plan and strategize and can do that for years, for decades even, to accomplish their goals. We run from outrage to outrage and fulminate in either fury or joy, depending on how it turned out, on how the outrage turned out, and then we move on to the next outrage. And our groups tend to be a cat herd of different groups that aren't particularly well organized together, whereas they're run like a almost like a quasi-military machine. And ours are always scrambling for money with each other and amongst each other, whereas they have essentially unlimited money pouring in from the billionaires in the fossil fuel industry. So they're two completely different creatures. And the Republican creature is just much better adapted to the kind of mischief that they're up to than we are to an ability in a persistent way to call it out.
Well, we have a very large herd of active cats on our show who are volunteers and activists who very much we like to keep busy.
Yeah.
So, what can we do? What can we as citizens do right now? Give us our marching orders.
Okay, here's the basic marching order. The basic marching order is that if you are engaged, you are probably engaged through a group or an organization. As my beloved Barbara Mikulski used to say, don't agonize, organize.
Organize.
Yep.
So presumably you're in a group that organizes. And what I would ask people to do is to go to whatever group they're a part of, that they support, that they engage with, and say, what are you doing about dark money? What are you doing about spotlighting what is going on? Because if you're a member of an environmental group, if you're a member of a civil rights group, if you're a member of a labor group, really almost any member of our democratic array, our cat herd of groups, is being damaged and harmed and blockaded and undermined by this dark money operation, and none have it really in their gun sights as a problem. If we all got together and realized that dark money was a common threat, not only to the Republic, but to also the interests that we organize around, then I think it would become a bigger priority. We'd talk about it more, the public would be better educated, and the sort of positive feedback loop of when a politician says something, the crowd says, yay, we love that. And then they go back and work more, and you begin to spin the engine in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Right now, I've been speaking about dark money at times into what seemed like a chasm of silence. And I just think it's so rotten. I keep talking anyway, but I think the more we can get that feedback loop going so that there's energy on our side about getting rid of this dark money issue. And the key to do that, make the damn Republicans vote on the Disclose Act that gets rid of it. Make them vote to protect dark money. Make them vote over and over to protect dark money. Make them vote until every American knows that they're the party that is letting these corporate oligarchs run the country through dark money front groups. Make them vote.
This all goes back to transparency, and it really is such an important topic, but kind of overwhelming to think about. We as Democrats so often applaud our grassroots fundraising. So many people gave $5 here and $5 there, and that's so important and it can make a big difference. But when you compare that to the billions of dollars in dark money coming from, like you said, this really almost military-like structure that has a long-term strategy, it takes more than grassroots donations. So
yeah. I think if you look, there are two concepts that I like to talk about. One is with regarding to the court, regulatory capture. And people have been thinking and reading and writing and opining about regulatory capture, agency capture forever. Became a big topic when the explosion in the drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico brought attention to how captured the mining management section of the interior was, and they had to blow it all up and change its name, and people got referred for prosecution and fired, but it was a captured agency. And the Supreme Court has been captured just like it was an agency. And if you've got some experience with agency capture, click, you get it right away. The other is covert operations. When we're messing around through our intelligence services in other countries, we are often running covert operations that create disinformation in those countries to try to disrupt them, create disarray, make sure that our point of view is getting through, even if it's not popular or even real. And that type of intelligence strategy for covert disinformation intelligence operations is being deployed against us by our own citizens, by these billionaires and fossil fuel companies. And when you think of it in those terms, you know how to undo it, you expose it, but it has structure, it has reality, it has traditions, it has method to it. And so if you understand the method of regulatory capture, and if you understand the method of covert operations, suddenly what they're doing in this country begins to seem a lot clearer. And I think that's worth keeping in mind.
Well, it's a daunting fight for sure.
But transparency and light are very powerful.
Yep.
Well, having said that, we need to let you go, but we have one question we ask all of our guests, and that's what brings you the most hope right now?
I guess the Jane Mayer article. Mm-hmm. She's the brilliant writer who wrote the book Dark Money and has been sort of a if the Democratic Party had a research capacity, it would be doing a lot of the work that she's been doing, but we don't, and she does, and so we kind of ride along on her. And she wrote a terrific article based on a transcript or a tape that she got of a meeting between Mitch McConnell's minions mm-hmm. and the Koch brothers' political minions. And in all of their minioning around, they were looking at how you wreck up and discredit Democrats' desire to clear out dark money corruption. And what they said in that meeting was, we can't do it. We can't touch it. This stuff it's like kryptonite for us. And forget convincing labor Democrats or Bernie bros, we can't even convince our own people. Our own Tea Partiers hate this dark money corruption apparatus. We are really, really in trouble on this issue. So it gives me hope that when we finally realize as Democrats that this is such a powerful issue and our adversaries are totally on the wrong side of it, that we can take advantage of that and really bring a day of transparency that right now it's hard to foresee.
We'll have to dig up that article and link everyone to it so that they can read it. Thank you so much for taking the time. You know, I love this interview because you have such a way of describing things visually, even though this is a podcast. We've got slime tsunamis and cockroaches and cat herds. I love it. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Mariah. I really appreciate it.